Good evening. Thank you for choosing to spend this quiet time with me tonight. I hope you found a comfortable position, perhaps propped against soft pillows, the lights dimmed low, the day finally behind you. Tonight we're going to explore something that might seem, at first, a bit unusual for a bedtime story, the history of an automobile. But this isn't a tale of speed or excitement or dramatic invention. Instead, it's a slow, gentle journey through time, watching the birth and life of a simple machine called the Ford Model T, and all the ordinary moments that surrounded it. We'll move slowly through workshops and factories, stand beside muddy roads, listen to the patient rhythm of engines starting and stopping, smell the oil and gasoline and leather, feel the cold metal of hand cranks on winter mornings. We'll meet farmers and factory workers, watch assembly lines move at their steady pace, observe the small rituals of maintenance and repair that defined life with this machine. There's no rush. We have all the time in the world. The story will unfold gently, like watching clouds drift across an afternoon sky. If this story helps you rest tonight, I'd be grateful if you'd consider liking or subscribing. I'm always curious where in the world you might be listening from. Feel free to leave a comment with your city and what time it is there. But there's no pressure. That can wait for tomorrow, if at all. For now, adjust your pillow one last time. Let your shoulders settle into the mattress. Close your eyes if you haven't already. Breathe slowly. We're going to step back in time now, more than a century, to a world that moved at the pace of horses, where roads were mud and dust, where distance meant something different than it does today. Let yourself drift back with me. There's nowhere else you need to be. The world before. Imagine you are standing on a dirt road in rural Michigan in the autumn of 1895. The air is cool, carrying the smell of wood smoke from farmhouse chimneys scattered across the rolling landscape. The road beneath your feet is not really a road at all, not by any modern measure. It's two parallel ruts worn into the earth by wagon wheels, with grass and weeds growing thick between them. When you look down the road in either direction, you see it disappear into a tunnel of trees, their leaves turning gold and orange, drifting down to settle in the muddy tracks. The sound that dominates this world is the sound of horses. From somewhere nearby comes the steady clop, clop, clop of hooves on packed earth, the jingle of harness chains, the creak of wooden wheels. A farmer drives past in a wagon pulled by two heavy draft horses, their breath steaming in the morning air. The wagon bed is filled with burlap sacks of grain. The farmer nods as he passes, and you can see the weariness in his face, the deep lines around his eyes. He's been up since before dawn, feeding and watering the horses, hitching them to the wagon, loading the grain. The trip to town will take 3 hours each way, 6 hours total, and the horses will be exhausted by the time they return. The smell is something you notice immediately if you're not used to it. The sharp, pungent odour of horse manure everywhere, mixed with the sweet smell of hay and the earthy scent of animals. Every street in every town, every road in the countryside carries this smell. It's simply part of life, as unavoidable as the mud itself. In cities, the problem is even worse. Thousands of horses produce thousands of tons of manure every day, piling up in the streets, tracked into homes and businesses, breeding flies in the summer, freezing into slippery mounds in winter. You walk along this road, feeling the mud suck at your boots. Yesterday it rained, and the road became nearly impassable. Wagons sank to their axles. Horses struggled and strained, their legs coated with mud up to their bellies. Some wagons simply gave up, pulled off to the side to wait for the road to dry, which might take days. Even now, with the surface somewhat firmer, you can see the deep ruts and gouges left by iron-rimmed wheels, the places where horses' hooves have churned the earth into a slippery soup. In winter, this same road becomes something else entirely. The mud freezes into hard ridges, and furrows that jolt every bone in your body as the wagon passes over them. Snow fills the ruts, hiding the obstacles beneath. Horses slip on ice, sometimes falling, sometimes breaking legs that mean the end of their working life, sometimes the end of their life entirely. Travel in winter is dangerous, exhausting, often impossible. Communities become isolated, cut off from each other until spring comes and the roads thaw into mud once again. You pass a farmhouse set back from the road, and you can see the barn behind it, larger than the house itself. This tells you something about priorities in this world. The barn must shelter the horses, the cows, the chickens, the equipment. The barn is heated by the warmth of animal bodies. Every morning before breakfast, the farmer walks out to the barn in darkness, carrying a lantern, and begins the ritual of care. Feed must be measured and distributed. Water must be carried, bucket by bucket, from the well or the pump. Stalls must be mucked out, the soiled straw and manure wheelbarrowed to the manure pile behind the barn. Hooves must be checked for stones or injuries. Harnesses must be inspected for wear, oiled and mended as needed. This routine never varies. It happens every single day, 365 days a year, regardless of weather, regardless of illness, regardless of holidays or exhaustion. The horses cannot feed themselves. They cannot pump their own water. They are living engines that require constant maintenance, and unlike machines, they can sicken and die. A farmer's wealth is measured partly in horses. To lose a good horse is a financial disaster that might take years to recover from. You continue walking, and now you reach a small town. Main Street is unpaved, of course, just wider ruts in the earth, with wooden boardwalks built up on either side so pedestrians can avoid the worst of the mud. Horses are tied to hitching posts in front of the general store, the feed store, the blacksmith's shop. Their heads hang low, tails swishing at flies, even this late in autumn. Their owners are inside conducting business that might take hours. The horses simply wait, patient and tired. The blacksmith's shop is a dark cavern filled with the ring of hammer on anvil, the roar of the forge, the acrid smell of hot metal and burning hoof. You watch the blacksmith at work, shoeing a horse. The animal stands calm, one rear hoof lifted and propped on the blacksmith's leather apron. The blacksmith has removed the old shoe, trimmed and filed the hoof, and now he's fitting a new iron shoe, fresh from the forge, still glowing dull red. He positions it against the hoof, and there's a sizzle and a cloud of smoke as the hot metal burns into the hoof. The smell is terrible, like burning hair, but the horse doesn't flinch. It's feeling no pain. The blacksmith knows exactly how deep he can go, but the smell lingers in the shop, mixing with coal smoke and iron dust and sweat. The blacksmith nails the shoe in place with practiced efficiency, 6 nails driven through pre-drilled holes in the shoe and into the hoof wall, bent over and filed smooth. He lowers the hoof, pats the horse's flank, moves on to the next hoof. There are 3 more to go. This single horse will take most of an hour. The blacksmith has 6 more horses waiting outside. He'll work until dark, then start again at dawn tomorrow. His hands are scarred and calloused, his back perpetually bent from leaning over, his lungs coated with years of coal dust and metal filings. You leave the town behind and walk out into open country again. The afternoon is wearing on. The sun hangs low in the western sky, turning everything golden. You come to a place where the road descends a long hill toward a creek at the bottom. The creek is maybe 20 feet wide, not deep, but there's no bridge. The road simply leads down to the water's edge, crosses through the shallow current, and climbs up the opposite bank. This is a ford, and in this world of horses and wagons, fording streams is simply part of travel. You watch a farmer approach in his wagon. He pauses at the top of the hill, looking down at the crossing. He's assessing the depth, the current, the condition of the creek bed. If it rained hard upstream, the creek might be running too high and fast to cross safely. If the bottom is too muddy, the wagon might become stuck. He decides to risk it. He speaks to his horses, shakes the reins, and the wagon begins to descend. The horses lean back against their collars, bracing to keep the heavy wagon from rolling forward too fast. The wagon wheels slide a bit in the loose dirt, leaving fresh scratches in the hillside. At the creek's edge, the horses don't hesitate. They've done this many times before. They wade in, and the cold water rises around their legs, reaching the wagon's axles. The current pushes against the wagon, trying to swing it downstream. The farmer keeps the horses pointed straight ahead, moving steadily. Water splashes over the wagon bed, soaking the bottoms of the grain sacks. The horses labour up the opposite bank, hooves churning in the mud, muscles bunching under their wet coats, and finally the wagon reaches level ground on the far side. The farmer doesn't pause. He continues on, leaving a trail of water dripping from the wagon bed. This is normal. This is what travel means in this world. Every journey requires planning, requires calculating time, not just by distance, but by road conditions, by weather, by the endurance of the animals. A trip of 20 miles might take all day. A trip of 50 miles might require an overnight stop, finding a barn or stable where the horses can rest and feed. A trip of 100 miles is an expedition that only the determined undertake, and it will leave both horses and humans exhausted for days afterward. You think about how this limits life. A young woman growing up on a farm might never travel more than 10 miles from the place she was born. Her entire world is defined by how far a horse can carry her in a day's journey. If she marries, she might move to another farm, but probably not far. Her parents will visit, but not often, because the journey is too difficult. Letters take days or weeks to arrive, carried by postal riders on horseback or in mail wagons, following the same muddy, rutted roads. News from distant places is old news by the time it arrives. The world is large and slow and isolated. And yet, even in this slow world, people are dreaming. In workshops and sheds and basements, in small factories and inventors' garages across America and Europe, men are tinkering with an idea. What if, they wonder, there was a vehicle that didn't need a horse? What if you could build a carriage that moved by itself, powered by some kind of engine? The idea isn't new. Steam engines have existed for a century, powering trains and ships and factory machinery. But making a steam engine small enough and light enough to power a road vehicle has proven nearly impossible. The dream of horseless carriages. Imagine you are standing in a dim workshop in Massachusetts in 1892. The space is crowded with tools and parts and half-finished projects. A single kerosene lamp hangs from the ceiling, casting yellow light that barely reaches the corners. The air is cold. It's winter, and there's no heat except for a small pot-bellied stove in one corner, barely keeping the room above freezing. Your breath makes clouds in the lamplight. In the centre of the workshop, a man is bent over a strange contraption. It looks like a carriage, but smaller, lighter, with no place to hitch horses. Under the carriage body, you can see a large copper boiler, pipes, a small firebox. This is a steam car, one of many experiments happening in workshops like this across the country. The man's name doesn't matter. There are dozens like him, all working on similar dreams, all facing similar problems. He's trying to get the engine to work. He opens the firebox door and adds coal carefully, watching the flames. He pumps water into the boiler by hand, working a lever back and forth. The water must be heated to create steam, and the steam must build enough pressure to drive the pistons that will turn the wheels. But everything about this process is slow and difficult. It takes 20 minutes just to build up steam pressure. The boiler is heavy, hundreds of pounds of copper and iron and water. The whole vehicle weighs more than the horse-drawn carriage it's meant to replace. Finally, the pressure gauge shows enough steam. The man opens a valve and you hear a hiss as steam rushes into the cylinders. The pistons begin to move, slowly at first, then faster. The wheels turn. The man's face lights up with excitement. But his excitement lasts only a moment. There's a loud clang from somewhere inside the engine, then a terrible hissing sound. Steam begins shooting from a joint in one of the pipes. The pressure drops instantly. The wheels stop turning. The man closes the valve and stands back, his shoulders sagging. Another failure. He'll spend the next 2 days taking the engine apart, finding the broken pipe, brazing it back together, reassembling everything, only to try again and likely face another failure. This is what invention looks like most of the time. Not dramatic breakthroughs, but slow, grinding persistence through failure after failure. The problems with steam cars are fundamental. They're too heavy, too slow to start, too dangerous. Boilers can explode if the pressure gets too high. They require constant attention, feeding coal and water, monitoring pressure. In cold weather, the water freezes. In hot weather, the boiler overheats. And even when everything works, they're loud, belching black smoke and cinders, frightening horses wherever they go. Some inventors try electricity instead. Electric cars are quieter, cleaner, easier to control. You find yourself in another workshop, this time in New York City in 1895. Here a different kind of carriage sits on wooden blocks. Underneath, instead of a steam boiler, there's a massive bank of lead-acid batteries, each one as big as a shoebox, dozens of them, wired together. An electric motor, compact and elegant, connects to the rear axle through a simple chain drive. The inventor throws a switch and the motor begins to hum. The rear wheels turn smoothly, quietly. This is much more promising than steam. Electric cars are already being manufactured in small numbers. They're popular with wealthy city residents, particularly women, who find them easy to drive and maintain. There's no cranking, no coal, no steam, no explosions. You just climb in, move a lever, and glide away almost silently. But the limitations become clear quickly. The batteries are incredibly heavy, over 1,000 pounds, adding enormous weight to the vehicle. And they don't hold much energy. An electric car can travel perhaps 30 or 40 miles before the batteries are depleted, and then they must be recharged, which takes hours. There are no electric outlets along country roads, no infrastructure for recharging. Electric cars are trapped in cities, limited to short trips, and they cost a fortune, $3,000 or more, equivalent to several years' wages for an ordinary worker. The third option is gasoline. Internal combustion engines had been invented in Europe in the 1880s, small engines that burned gasoline or kerosene vapour mixed with air, using the expanding gases to drive pistons. These engines were much lighter than steam engines, much simpler than electric systems. But they were also temperamental, difficult to start, prone to breaking down, and gasoline itself was hard to find. It was considered a waste product of kerosene refining, sold at pharmacies in small quantities as a cleaning solvent. You find yourself now in a brick shed behind a small house in Detroit in 1896. It's late at night, past midnight. Inside the shed, working by the light of several oil lamps, a young man is assembling something that barely looks like a vehicle at all. His name is Henry Ford, and he's a machinist, a tinkerer, someone who understands engines and gears and mechanical movements. He works for the Edison Illuminating Company during the day, but at night and on weekends he comes here to this shed to work on his obsession. What he's building is called a quadricycle. It has 4 bicycle wheels. He bought them from a catalogue and modified them slightly. The frame is made of metal tubing and wood, held together with bolts and metal straps. The seat is a simple wooden bench, barely padded. There's a small gasoline tank, maybe a gallon capacity, mounted under the seat. and mounted on the frame, the heart of the vehicle, a 2-cylinder engine that Ford built himself in his home workshop, machining the parts on a lathe, one piece at a time, over months of patient work. The engine is tiny by later standards, producing maybe 4 horsepower. It has no carburetor. Gasoline drips into the cylinders through simple valves. It has no proper cooling system. The cylinders are exposed to air and cool by convection. It has no electric starter, no lights, no brakes worth mentioning. To slow down, you reduce the engine throttle and drag your feet on the ground. To steer, you turn a wooden tiller, like steering a boat. To change speed, you move a leather belt from one pulley to another, giving you 2 speeds, slow and slightly less slow. Ford is making final adjustments. He checks every bolt, every connection. He fills the tiny gas tank. He sets the ignition timing. Then he steps back and looks at what he's created. It's ungainly, fragile looking, absurd really, but he believes it will work. He's tested the engine separately, knows it runs. Now he just needs to see if the whole machine can actually move. There's a problem though. He's been so focused on building the vehicle that he didn't think about how to get it out of the shed. The quadricycle is too wide to fit through the shed's door. For a moment, he considers taking the vehicle apart, carrying it outside piece by piece, reassembling it, but he's too eager. Instead, he picks up an axe and starts chopping at the door frame, widening the opening. Wood chips scatter across the workshop floor. Finally, the opening is wide enough. He pushes the quadricycle out into the alley behind his house. It's 4 o'clock in the morning on June 4th, 1896. The sky is just beginning to lighten in the east, but the streets of Detroit are still dark and empty. A light rain is falling, making the cobblestones slick and shiny in the lamplight. Ford's friend, Jim Bishop, has come along to help. Ford sits on the wooden bench seat, his hands gripping the tiller. Bishop stands ready with a can of gasoline and a rag, in case anything goes wrong. Ford advances the spark, opens the fuel valve, and spins the flywheel by hand to start the engine. Once, twice, 3 times. Nothing. He adjusts the timing slightly. 4th try. The engine coughs, sputters, catches. The sound is harsh in the quiet morning, a rapid pop, 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 echoing off the brick walls of the surrounding buildings. The engine settles into an irregular rhythm, missing occasionally, backfiring now and then, but running. Ford engages the drive belt. The rear wheels begin to turn. The quadricycle lurches forward, moving at a walking pace up the alley. Ford steers toward the street. The vehicle is vibrating terribly, the whole frame shaking, nuts and bolts rattling. The smell of gasoline and hot oil fills the air. The noise is incredible. The engine's exhaust has no muffler, just an open pipe spitting blue smoke. Bishop jogs along beside the quadricycle, ready to help if it stalls. They reach Grand River Avenue and turn onto the main street. The quadricycle putters along, maybe 6 miles per hour, no faster than a person walking briskly. A few lights appear in windows as people wake to the strange noise. Someone opens a 2nd-story window and looks out, sees the peculiar vehicle clattering down the street, shakes his head and closes the window again. Ford drives for about half an hour, making a large loop through the neighborhood. The engine runs hot, starts to miss and stumble. He coasts to a stop, lets it cool for 10 minutes, then starts it again and continues. By the time he returns to the alley behind his house, the sky is fully light. He's covered maybe 3 miles total. The quadricycle is still running, still functioning. He shuts off the fuel valve and the engine dies with a final cough and a puff of smoke. Ford and Bishop stand there for a moment, looking at the machine. It's primitive, crude, barely controllable. But it worked. It moved under its own power, carried a man through the streets without horses, without steam, without miles of electric wires. Ford is already thinking about improvements. The engine needs to be more reliable. The steering needs to be better. The whole frame needs to be stronger. But the fundamental idea is proven. It's possible. What Ford doesn't know, standing there in that alley in 1896, is that dozens of other inventors are reaching the same conclusion at roughly the same time. In Springfield, Massachusetts, the Duryea brothers have built a gasoline car. In Cleveland, Alexander Winton is building cars and even selling a few. In Europe, Carl Benz and Gottlieb Daimler have been manufacturing gasoline cars since the late 1880s. The idea is in the air and many hands are reaching for it simultaneously. But there's a long distance between a hand-built prototype that barely runs and a reliable vehicle that ordinary people can afford and use. That distance will take years to cross, and it will be measured in thousands of failed experiments, discarded designs, bankrupt companies, and the slow, patient accumulation of small improvements. Ford Motor Company. Years pass. Imagine you now find yourself standing on Mack Avenue in Detroit on a warm June morning in 1903. You're looking at a modest brick building, 2 stories, with tall windows designed to let in as much natural light as possible. A wooden sign over the door reads Ford Motor Company. This is not a grand beginning. The building is rented, the capital is borrowed. There are no assembly lines here, no mass production, just 10 or 12 workbenches scattered across the main floor, and a handful of men assembling automobiles by hand. You step inside. The smell hits you immediately. Machine oil, sawdust, fresh paint, varnish, leather, gasoline. The space is crowded with parts and materials. Against one wall, wooden crates hold engines shipped from the Dodge Brothers machine shop. Against another wall, metal fenders and hoods are stacked like giant steel petals. Wooden wheels, already assembled and painted, lean in neat rows. Leather seats wait to be installed. Brass headlamps and horns sit on a workbench waiting to be polished and mounted. The noise is modest compared to what will come later, the clink of wrenches, the rasp of files, the squeak of leather straps being stretched and fitted, occasional hammering. Men work methodically, assembling cars one piece at a time. There's no systematic process yet, no defined stations. One man might build an entire car over the course of several days, gathering parts as needed, fitting and adjusting and testing as he goes. You watch one worker installing an engine into a chassis. The chassis sits on sawhorses, its wheels not yet attached. The engine, a 2-cylinder design producing 8 horsepower, hangs from a block and tackle suspended from the ceiling beams. The worker guides the engine down carefully, aligning it with the mounting brackets. Another worker helps, positioning his hands to prevent the engine from swinging. Together, they lower it into place, then begin the tedious work of threading bolts through mounting holes, tightening them bit by bit, checking alignment, making sure everything is square and true. This takes time. There's no rushing the process. If the engine isn't mounted correctly, it will vibrate loose, cause problems down the road. So the workers are patient, methodical, checking and rechecking. When they're satisfied, they connect the drive shaft, attach the fuel tank, route the fuel line, connect the ignition wires. Each connection must be tight, secure, tested. An hour might pass installing just the engine. Another hour fitting the transmission and controls. Another hour mounting the wheels and adjusting the brakes. Near the windows, where the light is best, another worker is painting a car body. The bodies come pre-built from a supplier, but they need final painting and varnishing. The worker uses a brush, not a spray gun. Spray painting hasn't been invented yet. He dips the brush in a can of red paint and applies it in smooth, even strokes, trying to avoid drips and runs. The paint has a strong chemical smell that makes your eyes water. When he's finished with one coat, the body will need to dry for a full day before another coat can be applied. 3 or 4 coats are typical, with sanding between coats. The whole painting process for one car might take a week. Henry Ford moves through the workshop, stopping to watch each operation, offering suggestions, making small adjustments. He's 39 years old now, lean and energetic, his hands always moving, always touching things, checking fits, testing strength. He's learned from previous failures. This is actually his 3rd attempt at forming a car company. The first 2 collapsed due to disputes with investors and problems with design. But this time he's determined to succeed. The car they're building is called the Model A. It's a simple 2-seat runabout with a rear-mounted 2-cylinder engine. It can reach speeds of 30 miles per hour on good roads. It weighs about 1,250 pounds. It costs $850, which is expensive, equivalent to about 2 years' wages for a factory worker, but less expensive than most other cars on the market, which sell for $2,000 to $5,000. The first Model A is finished in late June 1903. Workers push it out through the wide loading doors onto Mack Avenue. The street is still mostly dirt, though the city has laid some cobblestones. A few neighbours gather to watch. One of the workers cranks the engine. This involves setting the spark and throttle controls, then rotating the crank at the front of the car vigorously until the engine catches. After several tries, the engine coughs to life, settling into a rhythmic put, put, put. Blue smoke drifts from the exhaust pipe. Ford himself takes the driver's seat. He engages the transmission, releases the brake, and the car lurches forward. It rolls down Mack Avenue at perhaps 15 miles per hour, bouncing over the rough surface, the engine sound echoing off the buildings. A horse tied to a post outside a nearby store shies nervously at the noise, pulling against its rope. Ford drives to the end of the block, turns carefully. The steering is heavy, requiring real effort, and drives back. He parks in front of the factory, shuts off the engine. The car has worked perfectly. Over the next year, Ford Motor Company will build 1,708 Model A cars. This sounds modest by later standards, but it's enough to establish the company as a viable business. The cars sell. Customers are pleased mostly. There are problems, of course. Engines break down, parts wear out. Roads destroy tyres and break springs. But compared to horses, the cars represent freedom and speed. A doctor can make house calls faster. A salesman can cover more territory. A family can visit relatives who live 20 miles away and return the same day, something impossible with horses. But Ford isn't satisfied with the Model A. He's already thinking about the next design, and the one after that. Over the next 5 years, the company will produce models B, C, F, K, N, R, and S. A confusing alphabet soup of designs, each one an experiment, testing different combinations of cylinder count, power, size, and price. Some are expensive luxury cars aimed at wealthy buyers. Others are simpler, cheaper machines meant for middle-class customers. Ford is searching for the right formula, the design that will allow him to build large numbers of cars and sell them for a price that ordinary people can afford. The workshop on Mack Avenue grows crowded. In 1904, the company moves to a larger building on Piquette Avenue. This new factory has more space, more natural light, a dedicated machine shop in the basement. The workforce grows to 100 men, then 200. Production increases. But the process is still fundamentally the same. Skilled workers assembling cars by hand, one at a time, each car taking days or weeks from start to finish. You find yourself in the Piquette Avenue plant on a cold winter morning in 1906. The building is barely heated. A few pot-bellied stoves glow red in the corners, but the vast space is still cold enough that workers can see their breath. They wear coats while they work, stopping every hour to warm their hands at the stoves. The windows are rimmed with frost on the inside. Outside, snow is falling, accumulating in the street. Despite the cold, work continues. A worker is fitting a wooden steering wheel to a steering column. The wheel is made of laminated wood, steam bent into a circle, sanded smooth, varnished. The spokes are mortised into the rim and hub, glued and pinned. It's beautiful in its simplicity, a piece of craftsmanship that will last for decades. The worker slides the wheel onto the column, tightens the nut that holds it in place, tests the movement. The wheel turns smoothly, the column rotating inside its bearing. Satisfied, he moves on to installing the foot pedals. Nearby, another worker is assembling an engine. The engine block sits on a workbench, a heavy casting of grey iron, rough-surfaced from the foundry. The worker has spent the morning cleaning the casting, filing away rough spots, tapping threads for bolts. Now he's installing the pistons, sliding each one carefully into its cylinder bore, making sure the piston rings are seated properly in their grooves. This requires patience and a delicate touch. The rings are brittle cast iron, easily broken if forced. Each piston must slide smoothly, with just the right amount of clearance. Too tight and it will seize, too loose and it will leak compression. Once the pistons are in, he'll install the crankshaft, then the camshaft, then the valve train, the ignition system, the carburetor, the cooling system. Each system must be assembled in the correct order, each part fitted precisely. There are no instruction manuals, no standardized procedures. Each worker relies on his own experience and skill, learned through apprenticeship and practice. If he makes a mistake, the engine might not run, or worse, it might run for a while and then fail, damaging itself or stranding a customer far from help. The worker's hands are stained with oil and grime. His fingernails are black. He wears a leather apron over his work clothes. He's been doing this job for 2 years now, assembling engines, and he's good at it. He can tell by feel when a bearing is seated correctly, can hear by sound when an engine is properly timed. He takes pride in his work. Each engine that leaves his bench carries his reputation. Across the factory floor, finished cars are being tested. A worker sits behind the wheel of a Model K, a 6-cylinder luxury car, large and heavy, priced at $2,500. He starts the engine, lets it warm for a few minutes, then drives it slowly around the inside of the factory, steering between workbenches and stacks of materials. He's listening to the engine, feeling for vibrations, watching the oil pressure gauge, the temperature gauge. Everything seems fine. He drives the car outside, down the street, around the block. The cold air makes the engine run rough until it warms up. The steering is stiff, but mechanically everything works. He returns to the factory, parks the car in the loading area. Tomorrow it will be delivered to a customer, a wealthy doctor who lives in Grosse Pointe. But while the Model K and other expensive cars are being built, Ford's attention is elsewhere. In a small locked room on the 3rd floor of the Piquet plant, a secret project is underway. Only a handful of workers are allowed inside. They're working on a new design, something different from everything Ford has built before. This car will be simple, strong, cheap to build, and reliable. Ford has been sketching and planning for months, drawing designs in chalk on the factory floor, arguing with engineers, testing materials. The goal is specific: create a car that an ordinary farmer or clerk or shopkeeper can afford. A car tough enough to survive terrible roads. A car simple enough that anyone can learn to drive it and repair it. A car that can be manufactured in large quantities with standardized parts, reducing costs through volume. Ford doesn't just want to build cars for the wealthy, he wants to build cars for everyone. This is a radical idea. Most automobile manufacturers are moving in the opposite direction toward bigger, more luxurious, more expensive cars. They see the automobile as a plaything for the rich, a status symbol. But Ford sees something different. He sees a tool, a machine that can transform ordinary life, make distances shorter, make work easier, connect isolated communities. But to do this, the price must come down dramatically. The Model T. Imagine you are standing inside that locked room on the third floor of the Piquet plant on a September afternoon in 1908. The room is crowded with 3 experimental vehicles in various stages of assembly. Blueprints are tacked to every wall. The floor is littered with discarded parts, failed experiments, sketches and calculations. Natural light streams through tall windows, illuminating the dust that hangs in the air. In the centre of the room sits the final prototype, painted black, its brass fittings polished to a golden shine. This is the Model T. After months of work, testing, modification and refinement, it's ready. Ford stands beside it, one hand resting on the hood, looking at what his team has created. The car is surprisingly tall, much taller than modern cars, sitting high off the ground on spindly-looking wheels. There's a reason for this height. American roads are terrible, and the car needs clearance to pass over ruts, rocks and stumps without getting stuck or damaging the underside. The body is simple, almost austere. No curves, no decorative flourishes, just straight panels and sharp angles, designed for ease of manufacturing. The hood is flat, held down with leather straps. The windshield is a single flat pane of glass, not yet divided into upper and lower sections. That will come later. Above the passenger compartment, a black canvas top stretches over wooden bows, providing minimal protection from rain, but no protection from wind or dust or cold. You walk around the car slowly, taking in the details. The wheels are wooden spoked, painted black, with iron rims wrapped in pneumatic rubber tyres. The tyres are narrow by modern standards, designed to cut through mud rather than riding on top of it. Each wheel is secured with a split wedge that can be knocked out with a hammer, allowing quick wheel changes on the road, essential since tyres puncture frequently on rough roads studded with horseshoe nails and sharp stones. At the front of the car, mounted prominently on the flat nose of the hood, is the starting crank. This is a heavy iron handle that folds up against the front bumper when not in use. To start the car, you'll need to insert this crank into a socket below the radiator and turn it vigorously to spin the engine over until it catches and starts running. This is not always easy. The engine might kick back if the timing is wrong, and the crank can spin backward violently, breaking thumbs or wrists of careless operators. Experienced drivers learn to grip the crank with their thumb on the same side as their fingers, never wrapping the thumb around, so that a kickback will knock the hand away, rather than trapping and breaking it. The engine itself is hidden under the hood, but you can hear Ford explaining it to his engineers. 4 cylinders cast in a single block. This is innovative, reducing cost and complexity compared to engines with separately cast cylinders. 20 horsepower at 1,600 revolutions per minute. Simple valves operated by a single camshaft. Splash lubrication. Oil is sloshed around inside the crankcase by the moving parts rather than being pumped under pressure. This makes the engine less complex but requires careful attention to oil level. If the oil runs low, the engine will quickly damage itself. The cooling system is equally simple, a honeycomb radiator at the front, connected by hoses to a water jacket surrounding the cylinders. There's no water pump. The system relies on thermosiphon circulation. Hot water rises naturally from the engine into the top of the radiator, cools as it passes through the radiator core, then sinks and flows back into the engine. This works reasonably well as long as the radiator doesn't freeze in winter or boil over in summer. Inside the car, the controls are unlike anything in a modern vehicle. There's no steering wheel with a centered hub. Instead, the wheel is offset to the left, and the driver sits on the left side, which is becoming the American standard. In front of the steering wheel, on the instrument panel, there's a single gauge, an ammeter showing whether the magneto is charging or not. No speedometer, no fuel gauge. To check the fuel level, you'll need to remove the seat cushion, unscrew the cap on the fuel tank underneath, and stick in a measuring rod or a finger. The transmission is operated by foot pedals, 3 of them, plus a hand lever on the left side of the driver. The leftmost pedal engages low gear when pressed down, high gear when released, but only if the hand lever is in the forward position. The middle pedal engages reverse. The right pedal is the brake, acting only on the transmission, not the wheels directly. There's also a parking brake, a hand lever on the right side. To start moving, you'll push the left pedal down, low gear, ease off the brake, and the car will creep forward. To gain speed, you'll gradually release the left pedal, allowing high gear to engage. To stop, you'll pull back the hand lever to neutral and press the right pedal for the brake. This system takes practice. New drivers frequently stall the engine or lurch forward unexpectedly or find themselves rolling backward on hills. But with experience, it becomes natural, even intuitive. And it has advantages. The planetary transmission is simple, durable, almost impossible to damage even with clumsy operation. It requires no clutch in the conventional sense, no complicated gear shifting. A farmer with no mechanical education can learn to drive a Model T in an afternoon. The materials tell a story about innovation. The frame is made of vanadium steel, a new alloy that's both stronger and lighter than conventional steel. Ford learned about vanadium steel by examining the wreckage of a French race car and having the metal analysed. He had to establish new steel mills just to produce it, because no American mills were making vanadium steel at the time. This investment in materials technology will pay enormous dividends, allowing the Model T to be both strong and light. The body panels are sheet steel, stamped in simple shapes. The fenders are steel, not wood or leather, as on earlier cars. The running boards, the steps along each side of the car where passengers can stand while boarding, are wood covered with a non-slip surface. The seats are simple bench seats, upholstered in black leather that will crack and wear over time, but can be easily patched or replaced. Every aspect of the design reflects Ford's guiding principles: simplicity, strength, manufacturability, and cost. No unnecessary ornament, no complex mechanisms, no expensive materials unless absolutely necessary. The entire car is designed to be built quickly, in large numbers, from interchangeable parts. This last point is crucial. In 1908, most cars are still partially custom built. Parts are hand-fitted, filed and adjusted to fit each specific car. But the Model T is designed so that every steering wheel will fit every steering column, every piston will fit any cylinder of the same year. Every wheel will mount on any hub. This standardization will eventually enable mass production on a scale never before achieved. The price is set at $850 for the basic touring car model, though other body styles will be offered at different prices. This is still expensive. Most American families earn less than $500 per year, but it's dramatically less than competing cars of similar capability, which typically cost $2,000 or more. And Ford has plans to reduce the price further through increased production and efficiency gains. On October 1st, 1908, the Model T is officially announced to the public. The first production cars begin rolling out of the Piquet plant in late October. Demand is immediate and strong. Customers line up, cash in hand, ordering cars they won't receive for months. The orders quickly exceed the factory's capacity to build. Ford and his managers realise they need more space, much more space, if they're going to meet the demand. Plans are drawn up for a massive new factory in Highland Park, a suburb north of Detroit. While this new plant is being designed and constructed, production continues at Piquette. You find yourself on the factory floor on a winter morning in early 1909, watching the assembly process. The Model T is still being built the old way, by teams of workers at stationary stations. A chassis sits on wooden horses at one station. 2 workers are installing the rear axle assembly. This is heavy work. The axle, complete with differential and brake drums, weighs about 150 pounds. The workers lift it together, grunting with effort, and slide it into position under the rear of the frame. One worker holds it in place while the other starts threading bolts through the mounting brackets. They work methodically, installing all the bolts finger tight first, then going back and tightening each one with a wrench, checking alignment as they go. At the next station, another team is installing the engine and transmission. These come as a unit, pre-assembled and tested in the engine shop downstairs. A small crane on an overhead track lifts the engine transmission assembly and carries it to the chassis. Workers guide it into position, lower it onto its mounts, then begin the process of bolting it down and connecting all the ancillary systems: fuel lines, exhaust pipe, cooling hoses, electrical wires. The car moves from station to station over the course of several days. At each station, specific components are added: the front axle and steering gear, the wheels and tyres, the body panels, the fenders, the running boards, the seats, the top frame and canvas cover, the brass headlamps and side lamps, the horn, the tools, crank, jack, tyre pump and toolkit stored under the seat or in a compartment on the running board. Finally, the car is complete. A worker fills the radiator with water, the fuel tank with gasoline, the crankcase with oil. He checks that all the controls operate properly. Then he takes the crank, inserts it in the front socket, sets the spark retard and throttle controls, and begins cranking. The engine catches on the 4th or 5th try, settling into its characteristic thump, thump, thump rhythm. The worker lets it idle for a few minutes, watching for leaks or problems. Satisfied, he climbs into the driver's seat, engages low gear, and drives the new car slowly out of the factory into the loading yard, where it will wait with dozens of others for delivery to dealers around the country. The sound of Model T engines fills the yard, a chorus of puttering, irregular, slightly syncopated rhythms, each engine subtly different in pitch and timing, creating an oddly musical effect. Blue smoke drifts across the snow-covered ground. The smell of exhaust and gasoline hangs in the cold air. Workers move between cars, performing final checks, loading them onto rail cars for shipment. You watch one car being driven onto a flatbed rail car. The driver is careful, steering slowly up the loading ramps, which are narrow and slippery with snow. The Model T's high ground clearance helps here. The car can navigate the steep angle without scraping its underside. Once the car is positioned, workers secure it with chains and wooden blocks to prevent it from shifting during transport. This car is headed to a dealer in Kansas. It will ride the rails for 3 or 4 days, then be driven off the flat car and delivered to the customer, a farmer who ordered it 6 months ago and has been waiting patiently ever since. The farmer has never driven a car before, has never even ridden in one. The dealer will give him a basic lesson in the operation of the controls, perhaps drive with him for an hour or 2, and then the farmer will be on his own, learning through trial and error, through reading the owner's manual, through talking with other Model T owners he meets on the road. In 1909, Ford builds and sells 10,607 Model T cars. In 1910, production increases to 18,664. In 1911, it reaches 34,528. The piquette plant is bursting at the seams. Every inch of floor space is occupied with cars in various stages of assembly. Workers are crowded together, getting in each other's way. Parts are piled everywhere, creating a chaotic maze. But relief is coming. The Highland Park plant is nearing completion. This will be the largest automobile factory in the world, a monument to Ford's vision of mass production. In January 1910, production begins to shift to Highland Park. By the end of the year, all Model T production has moved to the new facility, and the piquette plant is repurposed for other uses. You find yourself standing outside the Highland Park plant on a grey morning in early 1911. The building is enormous, 4 stories tall, covering several acres, with walls that seem to stretch endlessly in both directions. It's built of concrete and steel and glass, representing the most modern factory architecture. Banks of windows on all 4 floors flood the interior with natural light, reducing the need for artificial lighting and making the work environment less gloomy than older factories. Inside, the space is vast and bright. Rows of workbenches extend across the floor, organised by the components being assembled. In one section, engines are being built. In another, transmissions. In another, wheels are being assembled, spokes inserted into hubs, rims fitted and secured. Each component will eventually find its way to the main assembly floor, where complete cars will be put together. But even in this enormous new space, the assembly process is still fundamentally the same. Teams of workers at stationary positions, building cars one at a time. A complete car takes about 12 hours of labour to assemble. This is an improvement over the piquette days, achieved through better organisation and layout, but it's still slow. Ford and his production managers know they need to do better if they want to meet demand and reduce costs. The breakthrough is coming, though not quite yet. For now, in 1911 and into 1912, production continues in the traditional way. Workers arrive at dawn, punch time cards, take their positions at workbenches or assembly stations. The factory fills with noise, hammering, the whine of electric drills and grinders, the clank of tools, the shouts of foremen directing work. The smell is a complex mixture of oil, gasoline, hot metal, sawdust from wooden patterns, paint and varnish, sweat. Each worker performs his assigned tasks repeatedly, day after day. One man might spend all day installing steering wheels. Another spends all day installing rear axles. Another spends all day testing magnetos, checking that each one produces a proper spark, setting them aside if they fail, sending them back for repair or replacement. The work is tedious, sometimes physically demanding, always repetitive. During lunch breaks, workers gather in the cafeteria, eating sandwiches brought from home, drinking coffee purchased for a nickel from the company canteen. They talk about their work, about troubles with particular operations, about rumours of new policies or changes coming. Some talk about the cars themselves, about Model Ts they've seen on the street, about problems customers have reported, about their own dreams of one day owning a Model T. Because that's the irony. The men building these cars cannot afford to buy them. At $850, a Model T costs more than a year's wages for most factory workers who earn perhaps $2 or $3 per day. They can see the cars they're building, can touch them, can know every detail of their construction, but owning one remains out of reach. Some dream of saving for years to afford one. Most simply accept that the Model T is for others, for farmers and businessmen and doctors and lawyers, not for factory workers. You find yourself back at Highland Park on a spring morning in 1913. Something significant is happening on the factory floor. Production managers and engineers are conducting experiments, testing a new idea. They've set up a rope attached to a windlass, and they're using it to drag a Model T chassis slowly across the floor, past a line of workers standing at fixed positions. As the chassis moves past each worker, that worker adds specific parts. One man installs the front axle, the next bolts on the steering gear, the next mounts the wheels, the next connects the brake rods. The idea is simple. Instead of workers walking around the car, carrying heavy parts back and forth, wasting time and energy, bring the work to the worker. Let the car move, let the workers stand still. The inspiration comes from multiple sources: the overhead trolley systems already used to move parts around the factory, the disassembly lines in meatpacking plants where animal carcasses move past workers who each remove specific cuts of meat, even the conveyor systems in grain mills and breweries. The early experiments are crude. The rope system is slow and jerky. Workers must adjust their rhythm constantly as the chassis lurches forward in uneven increments. Sometimes it stops completely while the windlass is repositioned. Sometimes it moves too fast, and workers scramble to complete their tasks before the chassis slides past their station. But even with these problems, the time savings are apparent. What took 12 hours before now takes about 6 hours. Over the following months, the system is refined. The rope is replaced with a continuous chain-driven conveyor. The speed is carefully calibrated, not so fast that workers are overwhelmed, not so slow that time is wasted. The height of the conveyor is adjusted so workers don't have to bend over constantly, reducing back strain and fatigue. The stations are arranged in precise sequence, each task carefully timed and coordinated with the tasks before and after. Imagine you're standing on the assembly line floor on a cold morning in January 1914. The moving assembly line is now fully operational, and you're watching the first shift begin. The foreman blows a whistle and the conveyor starts moving. A bare chassis, just the metal frame with wheels attached, begins its journey down the line. The chassis moves at a walking pace, slow and steady, never stopping. At the first station, 2 workers lift a front axle assembly from a cart and position it under the front of the chassis. They work quickly, fitting the axle into its mounting brackets, starting the bolts by hand. By the time they've started all 4 bolts, the chassis has moved past them, and another bare chassis is arriving. They repeat the process, the same motions, the same sequence, every couple of minutes. The chassis continues down the line. At the next station, a worker uses a pneumatic wrench to tighten the front axle bolts. The wrench makes a loud rattling buzz, like an angry insect. He tightens each bolt to the same torque. Counting the seconds in his head, he's learned exactly how long to hold the trigger for proper tightness. By the time the last bolt is tight, the chassis has moved on, and the next one is arriving. Station by station, the car grows. The engine and transmission drop in from an overhead conveyor, lowered by workers, guiding it carefully into position. Bolts are threaded and tightened. The radiator is installed, hoses connected. The gas tank goes under the seat. The body panels are lowered onto the chassis and bolted down. Fenders are attached, running boards installed. The seats drop in, pre-upholstered in black leather. The steering wheel is fitted to its column. The windshield is bolted to the dashboard. The canvas top is stretched over its wooden frame and secured with snaps. All along the line, subsidiary conveyors bring parts to each station just as they're needed. Wheels arrive on one conveyor, engines on another, body panels on a third. Everything is timed, coordinated, synchronized, like a mechanical ballet. The workers move in rhythm with the line, the same motions repeated hundreds of times per shift. Reach, lift, position, bolt, tighten, reach, lift, position, bolt, tighten. The movements become automatic, muscle memory, performed without conscious thought. The noise is tremendous. The clatter and buzz of pneumatic wrenches, the rumble of the conveyors, the clang of metal on metal, the shouts of foremen, the hiss of compressed air, the thunder of stamping presses, in adjacent departments. The smell is a thick mixture of oil and gasoline and hot metal and fresh paint hanging in the air like a fog. The light is bright. Electric bulbs now supplement the natural light from the windows, but the brightness is harsh and glaring, creating deep shadows in the corners. You watch the line for an hour. In that time, you see 65 chassis begin their journey and 65 completed cars roll off the end of the line. Each car takes exactly 93 minutes from start to finish, measured from the moment the bare chassis enters the line to the moment the completed car is driven away for final testing. This is revolutionary. What took 12 hours just a year ago now takes an hour and a half. But there's a cost. You watch the workers' faces. They're blank, almost expressionless, focused on their tasks, with an intensity born of necessity. If a worker falls behind, if he fumbles a part or drops a bolt, the line doesn't stop. The chassis keeps moving. He must either abandon that car unfinished and let it pass to be pulled off the line for repair, or he must work frantically to catch up, risking injury in his haste. The pressure is relentless. The work is also mind-numbing. A man who installs steering wheels will install 500 steering wheels in a 10-hour shift. 500 times, he'll lift a wheel from the cart, slide it onto the steering column, thread the nut, tighten it with a wrench, check that it's secure. 500 times. Identical motions, identical thoughts, if any thoughts at all. His mind goes blank after the first 100. Time stretches and compresses. Hours feel like minutes, feel like eternities. The turnover rate is catastrophic. Workers quit after days or weeks, unable to tolerate the monotony and pressure. Some walk off the line in the middle of a shift and never return. Ford is hiring workers constantly, training them hastily, losing them just as quickly. The company is hiring 5 workers for every position, knowing that 4 will quit. This instability threatens the entire system. The assembly line requires experienced workers who know their tasks perfectly. Constant turnover means constant mistakes, constant delays, constant inefficiency. In January 1914, Ford announces a radical solution, the $5 day. Overnight, wages for assembly line workers will more than double, from about $2.30 per day to $5 per day. The announcement makes headlines across the country. Critics call it socialism, madness, a publicity stunt that will bankrupt the company. Economists predict disaster. Other manufacturers are furious, accusing Ford of disrupting the labour market. But Ford's reasoning is pragmatic, not altruistic. $5 a day is enough money to make workers stay. It's enough to make them tolerate the monotony, the pressure, the mind-numbing repetition. It's enough to attract the best workers from other companies, creating a labour force that's stable and experienced. And crucially, it's enough to allow Ford's own workers to buy the cars they're building, creating a new class of customers. The effect is immediate. Thousands of men line up outside Highland Park, hoping for jobs. The company can now be selective, choosing the strongest, most reliable workers. Turnover drops dramatically. Production becomes smoother, more efficient. The $5 day, combined with the moving assembly line, transforms automobile manufacturing from a craft into an industry. You find yourself back at Highland Park on a night shift in late 1914. The factory never sleeps now. As the day shift ends at 5 p.m, the night shift is already arriving, thousands of men streaming through the gates. They punch time cards, hang their coats on hooks in the locker rooms, put on work aprons, and take their positions on the line. At exactly 5:15, the whistle blows and the conveyors start moving again. The night shift has a different character than the day shift. The light is entirely artificial now, banks of electric bulbs creating pools of harsh illumination broken by deep shadows. The windows are black rectangles, reflecting the interior of the factory back at itself. Outside, Detroit is dark and quiet, but inside, the factory roars with light and noise and motion. Workers on the night shift are often immigrants, Poles, Italians, Hungarians, Russians, men who speak little English, but who can learn the physical motions of assembly work quickly. Many have come to America specifically because of Ford's $5 day, drawn by stories that spread across Europe of unprecedented wages. They live in crowded boarding houses near the factory, sleeping during the day, working through the night, saving their money to bring families over from the old country or to buy small houses in Detroit's expanding neighborhoods. You watch a young Polish immigrant at his station. He's been working at Ford for 3 months, installing brake assemblies. He's maybe 20 years old, thin but strong, his hands already calloused and scarred from the work. He lifts each brake assembly, a metal plate with brake shoes and springs and connecting rods, and fits it to the chassis, threading bolts through mounting holes, tightening them with practiced efficiency. He works without thinking, his mind elsewhere, perhaps in his village in Poland, perhaps planning how to spend his wages, perhaps nowhere at all, simply blank, enduring. The chassis moves past him. Another arrives. He repeats his task. The chassis moves past. Another arrives. The rhythm is hypnotic, almost meditative, if you can surrender to it. Stop fighting it. Let your body move automatically while your mind floats free. Some workers achieve this state, finding a kind of peace in the repetition. Others never can, remaining constantly aware of every second, every motion, every car, watching the clock on the wall, counting the hours until the shift ends. At midnight, the lunch whistle blows. The line stops. Workers shuffle to the cafeteria, exhausted even though they're only halfway through the shift. They eat in silence, too tired to talk, then return to the line. The whistle blows. The line starts moving again. More hours of repetition, more chassis arriving in endless succession, more parts lifted and positioned and bolted and tightened. Finally, at 3 a.m., the pace changes slightly. Production slows as the night shift nears its end, and the early morning shift begins arriving. By 4 a.m., the transition is complete. New workers take positions on the line, fresh and energetic compared to the exhausted men they're replacing. The night shift workers clock out, collect their coats, walk out into the pre-dawn darkness. The streetcars are running, carrying workers home through empty streets. Soon they'll be asleep, and the factory will continue without them. The line moving, the cars accumulating, the assembly process never stopping. Model T everywhere. Time moves forward. Imagine you're now standing beside a dusty road in rural Iowa on a bright Sunday morning in July 1915. The sky is enormous and cloudless, that endless Midwest sky that stretches horizon to horizon without interruption. The air is warm and still, carrying the smell of growing corn from the fields that extend in every direction, interrupted only by occasional farmhouses and windmills and distant tree lines marking creek beds. A sound approaches from down the road, a distant puttering, growing louder. You wait, watching, and finally a Model T appears, trailing a plume of dust that hangs in the still air behind it. The car is black, of course, coated now with a layer of tan dust that obscures its shine. A canvas top provides shade for the occupants, a farmer, his wife, and 3 children, all dressed in their Sunday clothes. They're heading to church in town, 6 miles away, a journey that once took 90 minutes by horse and wagon, but now takes 20 minutes by automobile. The farmer guides the Model T past you, and you can see his face, weathered by sun and wind, deeply creased around the eyes, but wearing an expression of quiet satisfaction. He learned to drive this car 3 months ago when he bought it from the Ford dealer in town, paying $440, the current price for a basic Model T touring car. The price has dropped steadily as production has increased. What cost $850 in 1908 now costs almost half that, making it finally accessible to working farmers who manage their money carefully. The car disappears down the road, the sound of its engine fading, the dust slowly settling. An hour later, you find yourself standing in front of a small white church in town. The churchyard is filled with Model Ts, a dozen of them parked in rough rows, their tops raised against the sun, their brass radiators gleaming. A few horses and buggies stand at the far end of the yard, families that haven't yet made the transition to automobiles, but the horses are restless, nervous, disturbed by the smell and sound of the cars. After the church service ends, families gather outside, talking, the men naturally drifting together to discuss their automobiles. You listen to their conversation. One farmer is explaining how he replaced a broken fan belt using a length of rawhide, cutting it to length, soaking it in oil, threading it onto the pulleys. It worked perfectly, he says, drove 30 miles home without problems. Another farmer describes a technique for cleaning spark plugs using gasoline and a wire brush, then carefully adjusting the gap using a thickness gauge made from folded paper. These conversations are typical. Model T owners have become amateur mechanics by necessity. The cars are simple enough that ordinary people can understand and repair them, but they're also complex enough that problems arise constantly. Spark plugs foul and must be cleaned. Tyres puncture and must be patched or replaced. Bolts vibrate loose and must be retightened. Valves need periodic adjustment. The carburetor needs constant tuning to account for changes in altitude, temperature, and gasoline quality. Most of these repairs happen beside the road or in barn workshops. You find yourself now on a hot afternoon in August 1916, standing beside the same Iowa road, watching a farmer deal with a punctured tyre. The Model T sits at an angle, one front wheel slightly lower than the others. The farmer has jacked up the front end using the jack that came with the car, a simple screw jack operated by turning a handle. The car is now high enough that he can remove the wheel. He knocks out the split wedge that holds the wheel on the hub, then pulls the wheel free. The tyre is obviously flat, sagging off the rim. He carries the wheel to a shady spot under a tree and sits down with it. Using tyre irons, 2 flat metal bars with curved ends, he pries the tyre off the rim. This is hard work, requiring leverage and strength. The rubber is stiff from the heat. Finally the tyre comes free and he pulls out the inner tube, examining it to find the puncture. There, a small hole in the rubber, probably from a horseshoe nail lying in the road. He pulls out his repair kit, a small metal tin that lives under the car's seat. Inside are rubber patches, a tube of vulcanizing cement, and a small piece of sandpaper. He roughens the area around the hole with sandpaper, applies a thin coat of cement, waits for it to become tacky, then presses a patch firmly over the hole. He'll wait 10 minutes for the cement to cure, using the time to inspect the tyre casing for thorns or embedded nails, removing any he finds. Once the patch has set, he dusts the repaired area with chalk dust from a small bag in the repair kit. This prevents the patch from sticking to the inside of the tyre. He partially inflates the tube using a hand pump, just enough to give it shape, then wrestles the tyre back onto the rim, tucking the tube inside. Finally, he inflates the tyre fully, pumping the hand pump rhythmically, counting strokes. About 200 strokes will bring the tyre to proper pressure. He carries the repaired wheel back to the car, slides it onto the hub, drives the wedge back into place with a hammer, lowers the jack, and tests the repair by pressing on the tyre with his hand. Firm. Good. The whole process has taken 45 minutes. He loads his tools back under the seat, wipes his hands on a rag, cranks the engine to restart it. It died while he worked, and continues on his way. He'll be home before dark, still in time for evening chores. This kind of roadside repair is so common that every Model T owner becomes expert at it. The car is designed for this reality. The wheels are easily removable. The engine is accessible by lifting the hood. Most parts can be replaced with simple hand tools, a wrench, a screwdriver, a hammer, pliers. Ford even publishes detailed repair manuals that farmers can order by mail, with clear diagrams and step-by-step instructions. The Model T also proves remarkably adaptable. You find yourself on a farm in Nebraska in autumn 1917, watching a farmer use his Model T to power a threshing machine. The car is parked in the barnyard, one rear wheel jacked up off the ground. A long leather belt runs from the elevated wheel to a pulley on the thresher. The farmer starts the engine, engages the transmission in high gear, and the rear wheel begins spinning. The belt whips around, transferring power to the thresher, which starts its internal mechanisms, shakers and beaters and sieves that separate grain from chaff. Another farmer feeds sheaves of wheat into the thresher's hopper. The grain pours out one chute into burlap sacks, while straw and chaff blow out another chute, creating a golden pile that glitters in the afternoon sun. The Model T's engine runs steadily, the elevated wheels spinning, the belt singing as it slices through the air. This same car will tomorrow carry the farmer to town to sell his grain, and next Sunday will carry his family to church. It's a tractor, a truck, a power source, and a passenger car, all in one. In cities, the Model T has become equally ubiquitous. You find yourself standing on a busy street in Chicago on a weekday morning in 1918. The street is filled with traffic, streetcars on rails down the centre, automobiles filling the lanes on either side, a few horse-drawn wagons stubbornly holding their ground. Most of the automobiles are Model Ts, though there are a few Chevrolets, Dodges and other makes scattered among them. The Model Ts come in different configurations. Some are basic touring cars, black with canvas tops, carrying families or businessmen. Others have been converted to delivery trucks, with custom wooden bodies built onto the chassis, painted with company names and advertisements. You see a Model T bakery truck, its enclosed body keeping the bread clean. A Model T milk truck with glass bottles rattling in metal carriers. A Model T delivery van for a dry goods store piled high with packages. A Model T taxi pulls up to the curb near where you stand. The driver, wearing a flat cap and vest, helps an elderly woman into the back seat, then climbs behind the wheel, cranks the engine, and pulls back into traffic. Model T taxis have become common in cities, offering cheap transportation compared to horse-drawn cabs. The drivers are owner-operators usually, men who bought a Model T on credit and are working to pay it off while making a living. You watch the flow of traffic, the constant motion. The Model Ts move at different speeds, some creeping along at 10 or 15 miles per hour, others accelerating to 30 on the straightaways before slowing for intersections. There are no traffic lights yet, just police officers standing at major intersections, directing traffic with hand signals and whistles. The officers have learned to read the different sounds and movements of Model Ts, the particular sputter of an engine that's about to stall, the lurch that indicates a driver unfamiliar with the planetary transmission, the confident, smooth motion of an experienced driver who's become one with his machine. The smell of exhaust hangs in the air, a new smell for cities, replacing the old smell of horse manure gradually, year by year. Some people complain about the fumes, write letters to newspapers about the pollution, call for regulations. But most people simply adjust, accepting this as the price of progress. The automobile has brought speed and convenience and freedom of movement. A little smoke seems a reasonable trade. War and expansion. The world is at war. You find yourself now on a muddy road in France in October 1918. The war has been raging for more than 4 years, and the landscape bears its scars. The trees along the road are shattered stumps, splintered by artillery. The fields on either side are cratered and churned, vegetation gone, replaced by mud and shell holes and scattered debris. The sky is grey and low, spitting cold rain. Along this road comes a convoy of Model Ts, modified as ambulances. Each has been fitted with an enclosed wooden body, painted olive drab, with red crosses painted on the sides and roof. The canvas top has been replaced with a solid roof to provide better protection for the wounded men inside. The rear section of each ambulance contains 2 stretcher racks, one above the other, and space for a medical corpsman to sit beside the patients. You watch the ambulances approach. They're moving slowly, carefully, trying to avoid the worst of the ruts and craters. Even with the Model T's high ground clearance, the conditions are nearly impossible. The lead ambulance hits a deep hole concealed by muddy water, and the whole vehicle lurches violently. Inside, wounded men groan in pain as their stretchers shift and bang against the wooden walls. The driver of the lead ambulance is an American volunteer, a young man from Michigan who knew how to drive a Model T before he volunteered for ambulance service. He's been driving these roads for 6 months now, shuttling wounded men from field hospitals near the front lines back to larger hospitals in the rear areas. He knows every technique for keeping the Model T running in these conditions: how to clean spark plugs caked with mud, how to drain water from the fuel tank, how to wrap chains around the rear tyres for traction in deep mud, how to repair broken spokes with wire and wood splints. The convoy continues slowly toward its destination, a field hospital 10 miles behind the lines. The journey takes 3 hours. By the time the ambulances arrive, it's nearly dark. Medical orderlies rush out to unload the wounded, carrying stretchers into the hospital tents. The drivers remain with their vehicles, checking for damage, refueling from jerry cans, making minor repairs by the light of oil lamps. The Model T has proven surprisingly effective in military service. Its lightweight means it doesn't sink as deeply into mud as heavier vehicles. Its simple engine is relatively easy to repair with basic tools and improvised parts. Its high ground clearance allows it to navigate rough terrain. Thousands of Model Ts serve as ambulances, staff cars, light trucks, and utility vehicles throughout the war. They're not glamorous military equipment. There are no Model T tanks or fighter planes, but they're workhorses performing unglamorous but essential tasks day after day. When the war ends in November 1918, many soldiers return home with stories about the Model T's reliability and toughness. These stories spread through communities, building Ford's reputation internationally. The company begins serious export efforts, shipping Model Ts to Europe, South America, Australia, Asia. In some countries, Ford establishes assembly plants, shipping components in crates and employing local workers to assemble them. This reduces costs and avoids import tariffs while creating jobs in foreign markets. You find yourself now in a small assembly plant in Manchester, England in 1920. The plant is tiny compared to Highland Park. Just one building, maybe 50 workers. But the process is recognisable. Components arrive in wooden crates from America: engines, transmissions, axles, body panels, wheels, all the parts needed to build a complete Model T. British workers unpack the crates, sort the parts, then assemble them into finished cars using methods learned from Ford engineers sent from Detroit to train them. The work is slower here than in Detroit. There's no moving assembly line, just traditional stationary assembly, but the parts are standardized, interchangeable, designed for efficient assembly. A team of 3 men can build a complete car in a day. The finished cars are sold through British dealers to British customers. Farmers, doctors, businessmen, small companies needing light trucks. The Model T is becoming a global vehicle, serving similar roles in different countries, adapting to local conditions and needs. Back in America, production continues to climb. By 1920, Highland Park is building more than 5,000 Model Ts per day. The company has opened additional factories, a massive plant in River Rouge on the outskirts of Detroit that will eventually eclipse Highland Park in size and capacity. Ford is building steel mills to produce his own steel, glass factories to produce windshields and windows, rubber plantations in Brazil to produce raw rubber for tyres. The company is becoming vertically integrated, controlling every aspect of production from raw materials to finished vehicles. You find yourself now on a production floor at Highland Park on a day in 1923. The moving assembly line is still operating, but it's been refined and improved over the years. The conveyors move more smoothly now. The stations are better organised, with parts delivered exactly where and when they're needed. The workers are more experienced, more efficient, moving with practiced precision. But something else has changed, something harder to define. The initial revolutionary excitement is gone, replaced by routine. The $5 day is still good money, but it no longer feels like a fortune. Prices have risen during and after the war, eroding purchasing power. Other companies have matched or exceeded Ford's wages. The workers are still well paid by industrial standards, but they're no longer grateful. The work is still monotonous, still demanding, still exhausting. You watch a worker install steering wheels, the same task you watched a worker perform years ago. This might even be the same man. It's hard to tell because the work has aged him. His movements are mechanical, automatic, performed without thought or attention. His face is expressionless, blank. He's not thinking about steering wheels or cars or Ford or anything at all. He's simply enduring, counting hours until the shift ends, counting days until Sunday, counting years until he's saved enough money to retire or start his own small business or escape somehow from this line, this factory, this endless repetition. By the mid-1920s, the Model T dominates the automobile market. In 1923, Ford produces more than 2 million Model Ts. In 1924, production peaks at over 2 million again. Every other car on American roads is a Model T. The vehicle has become so common that it's almost invisible, as familiar and unremarkable as a horse had been 20 years earlier. Children grow up never knowing a world without Model Ts, just as their grandparents grew up never knowing a world without horses. But success contains the seeds of problems. Competitors have been watching Ford, learning from his methods and developing their own assembly line systems. General Motors, reorganized and energized under new management, begins producing Chevrolets using similar mass production techniques. The Chevrolet is more modern in some ways, smoother, more comfortable, available in colours other than black, equipped with a conventional transmission that's easier for new drivers to master. Other manufacturers offer similar alternatives: Dodge, Overland, Willys Knight. These cars cost slightly more than the Model T, but not much more, and they offer features the Model T lacks. Enclosed cabins with real windows, electric starters so women can start the cars without cranking, more comfortable seats and suspensions, modern styling. Ford's response is to reduce prices further. By 1925, a basic Model T touring car costs just $260, nearly a third of its original 1908 price. This is an astonishing achievement, the result of 15 years of continuous refinement and efficiency improvements. But low price alone is no longer enough. Customers are starting to want more than basic transportation. They want comfort, style, modernity. You find yourself at a Ford dealership in a small Ohio town in the summer of 1926. The showroom is clean and bright with 2 Model Ts on display, a touring car and a sedan. The touring car still has the open body with canvas top, the classic Model T design. The sedan is more modern, with an enclosed body, roll-up windows and a proper roof, though it still sits on the same high chassis with the same basic mechanical components underneath. A farmer and his wife are considering the sedan. The salesman is explaining its features, the comfort of the enclosed body, the protection from rain and wind and dust, the glass windows, but the farmer looks sceptical. He glances across the street at the Chevrolet dealership, where a new Chevrolet sedan sits in the window, lower and sleeker and more modern looking. The Chevrolet costs $100 more, but it has an electric starter, better upholstery, smoother styling. The farmer's wife prefers the Chevrolet. She says so quietly but firmly. The farmer hesitates, clearly calculating costs, but finally nods. They thank the Ford salesman and walk across the street. You follow them and watch as they enter the Chevrolet dealership, are greeted enthusiastically, begin discussing terms. Half an hour later, they've ordered a Chevrolet, arranging financing through the dealership at terms that make the monthly payments manageable. This scene is repeating itself across America. The Model T is losing its dominance. Sales are declining slowly but steadily. Ford tries various tactics, offering the Model T in colours again after years of any colour as long as it's black, developing new body styles, adding features. But these are superficial changes. The fundamental design is unchanged since 1908. The planetary transmission, the magneto-ignition, the gravity-fed fuel system, the high chassis, all the features that made the Model T revolutionary in 1908 are now old-fashioned, even obsolete. Henry Ford resists change. He believes in the Model T, believes its simplicity and low price will always find customers. He's emotionally attached to the design, having invested so much of his life and reputation in it. But by early 1927, even he must acknowledge reality. Sales are declining seriously, dealers are complaining, the company is losing money, the Model T must be discontinued. On May 26, 1927, the last Model T rolls off the assembly line at Highland Park. The car is number 15,007,033. More than 15 million Model Ts produced over 19 years, an unprecedented production run for any product, not just automobiles. Workers gather around the final car, some of them veterans who've been with Ford since the early days. There are no speeches, no ceremonies, just a quiet moment of acknowledgement. The engine is started one last time. The familiar sound fills the factory, the thump, thump, thump rhythm that has been constant for nearly 2 decades. A worker drives the car slowly down the line, past empty stations, past workers who've stopped their tasks to watch. At the end of the line, the car stops. The engine idles for a moment, then is shut off. The sound dies away, and the sudden silence feels strange and wrong. The assembly line stops. The conveyors fall silent. For the first time since 1913, the Highland Park assembly line is motionless. Workers clock out and go home. The lights are turned off. The factory, which has run almost continuously for 14 years, is quiet and dark. The next day, workers begin dismantling the line, removing the conveyors, clearing the floor. New equipment will be installed to build the Model A, a completely new car designed to compete with Chevrolet and other modern automobiles. But that's tomorrow's story. Today, the Model T era has ended. Aftermath time moves forward again. You find yourself standing beside a rural road in Arkansas on a hot afternoon in July 1932. The Depression is at its worst. Banks have failed. Farms have been foreclosed. Families have lost everything. The road is dusty, dry from weeks without rain. Crops in the nearby fields are stunted and brown. A sound approaches, familiar but rougher than you remember. A Model T appears, but not the shiny black machine of earlier years. This car is ancient, battered, barely holding together. The paint is faded and patched with rust. One fender is missing entirely. The canvas top has been replaced with a crude structure of wood and tar paper. The tyres are worn smooth, their tread completely gone, the rubber cracked and deteriorating. The car stops beside you with a cough and a shudder. The family inside looks exhausted. A man, a woman, 3 children, all thin and dusty and sunburned. Their clothes are worn. The children's eyes are too large in their gaunt faces. The man is driving, his hands gripping the wooden steering wheel. He asks if you know where there might be work, any kind of work. You shake your head. He nods, unsurprised, and the car continues on, puttering slowly down the road, trailing a faint blue smoke. This scene is common in the 1930s. The Model T, now years out of production, has found new life among the desperate poor. You can buy a used Model T for $10, sometimes $5, sometimes traded for goods or services. They're old and worn, but they still run, and parts are everywhere, in junkyards, in barns, in the sheds of farmers who've upgraded to newer cars. With basic mechanical skills and determination, you can keep a Model T running almost indefinitely, fabricating parts, improvising repairs, making do. You find yourself in a junkyard in Oklahoma in 1934. Rows of dead automobiles rust under the relentless sun. Model Ts, yes, but also Chevrolets, Fords, Dodges, cars from the 1920s and early 1930s, abandoned when their owners could no longer afford repairs or gasoline. The junkyard owner, a grizzled man with stained overalls, walks among his inventory, salvaging usable parts, selling them for pennies to customers desperate to keep their vehicles running. A man arrives driving a wheezing Model T and asks for a carburetor. The junkyard owner nods, leads him to a Model T Hulk, and together they remove the carburetor from the dead car. The customer inspects it, checking for cracks or wear. Finding it acceptable, he pays 50 cents, carries it to his car, and spends an hour installing it, using tools borrowed from the junkyard. Finally, his engine starts and runs smoother than it has in months. He returns the tools, drives away satisfied. His car will run a while longer. These Depression-era Model Ts become symbols of endurance and stubbornness. Families live in them, sleep in them, cook beside them. The cars carry migrants from the Dust Bowl to California across endless desert and mountain roads, breaking down repeatedly, repaired with baling wire and scrap metal and sheer determination. Some make it. Others don't, ending up abandoned beside the road, their passengers continuing on foot or catching rides with passing trucks. The war comes again. You find yourself in 1942, standing in a farmyard in Minnesota. A Model T sits beside a barn, still in use, still working. Gasoline is rationed now, 3 gallons per week for non-essential use. Tyres are impossible to buy. Rubber has been commandeered for military use. But the farmer has managed to keep his Model T running. He's patched the tyres with rubber cut from old boots and inner tubes. He's adjusted the carburetor to run on a mixture of gasoline and kerosene, stretching his meagre fuel ration. The car makes weekly trips to town for supplies, moving slowly, conserving fuel, the farmer nursing it along, but the Model T's time is finally truly ending. Scrap drives sweep the country, collecting metal to build tanks and planes and ships. Old cars, including thousands of Model Ts, are hauled to scrap yards, stripped of non-metal components and crushed or cut up for their steel. The government offers small payments, $10, $20 for an old car. Patriotic posters urge citizens to contribute. Your old car can help win the war. Many Model T owners surrender their vehicles, reluctantly, sadly, but understanding the necessity. After the war, the few surviving Model Ts are antiquated curiosities. The automotive world has moved on. post-war cars are low and sleek with powerful engines, automatic transmissions, radios, heaters, comfortable seats. The Model T, with its high chassis and primitive controls and hand crank starting, belongs to another era entirely. Most are scrapped or left to rot in barns and fields, forgotten. You find yourself in a barn in Vermont in 1955. Dust motes drift in shafts of sunlight streaming through gaps in the barn walls. In the shadows at the back sits a Model T, untouched for years. The tyres are flat, rotted. The upholstery is cracked and dry. Mice have nested in the seats, pulling out stuffing for their homes. The engine is seized, rusted solid from years of moisture and neglect. Cobwebs drape the steering wheel. The brass radiator and lamps are tarnished green. A farmer enters the barn, sees you looking at the old car. He pauses, then walks over. He learned to drive in this car, he says, back in 1923, when he was 16. His father bought it new, drove it for 10 years, then parked it here when he bought a newer car. The farmer had always meant to fix it up, restore it, but there was never time, never money. Now it's too far gone. He's thinking of hauling it to the scrap dealer, getting a few dollars for the metal. He touches the hood gently, sadly, then turns and walks away, leaving you alone with the silent machine. But not all Model Ts meet this fate. Some are rescued, restored, preserved. A small group of enthusiasts begins collecting and restoring Model Ts in the 1950s and 1960s, recognizing their historical importance. These collectors search barns and fields and junkyards looking for salvageable cars. They find them in various conditions, some nearly complete, others reduced to rusted frames and scattered parts. They haul them home, disassemble them, clean every part, repair or replace what's damaged, reassemble them meticulously. You find yourself at a car show in California in 1975. Rows of restored antique cars gleam in the sunlight, Packards, Pierce Arrows, Cadillacs, and among them several Model Ts polished to perfection, their brass radiators shining like gold, their black paint reflecting the sky. Their owners stand nearby wearing period costumes, flat caps and vests and driving goggles, answering questions, offering to demonstrate the cars. One owner invites you to watch as he starts his Model T. He explains the process carefully. First, check that the transmission is in neutral by pulling back the hand lever. Retard the spark using the lever on the steering column. This prevents the engine from kicking back during starting. Open the choke partially if the engine is cold. Make sure the ignition switch is on. Now grip the crank carefully, thumb on the same side as your fingers, never wrapped around. Pull the crank upward sharply. The engine turns but doesn't catch. Again, upward, and this time the engine coughs. Third try, it catches and runs, settling into that characteristic irregular rhythm. The owner advances the spark timing, and the engine smooths out slightly. He climbs into the driver's seat, gestures for you to climb into the passenger seat. You hesitate, then accept. The seat is firm leather, slippery. There are no seat belts, of course, no doors either, just a step and an open side. The owner pushes the left pedal down, engages low gear, and the car creeps forward. He steers through the parking lot, navigating carefully, then turns onto a quiet street. The sensation is strange. You're sitting high above the road, bouncing on the leaf spring suspension. The engine is loud and rough, vibrating through the whole frame. Wind blows in your face. There's no windshield to shelter behind, just the sense of moving through air. The steering wheel jerks in the owner's hands as the wheels hit irregularities in the road. Everything feels mechanical, direct, unrefined. You're acutely aware that you're in a machine, that gears and pistons and springs are working beneath and around you. The owner demonstrates the planetary transmission, explaining how pressing the left pedal all the way down gives you low gear, Releasing it halfway gives you neutral. Releasing it fully engages high gear. He shows how the car will creep forward even at idle if you leave it in low gear. He demonstrates the brake, which acts on the transmission, not directly on the wheels. Everything is different from modern cars, requiring different techniques, different instincts. After 20 minutes, he returns to the car show and parks. You climb out, legs slightly shaky from the vibration. The owner smiles, asks what you thought. You search for words. It was remarkable, you say. Uncomfortable, crude, but remarkable. To experience how people once travelled, how they once related to machines and roads and distance. The show continues. People gather around the restored Model Ts, taking photographs, asking questions, listening to stories. Older visitors share their own memories, grandparents who owned Model Ts, childhood rides, learning to drive, road trips. Younger visitors are fascinated by the simplicity, the mechanical directness, the absence of everything they associate with cars. No power steering, no automatic transmission, no radio, no air conditioning, no electronic anything, just metal and leather and wood, and simple mechanisms doing simple tasks. Decades pass. You find yourself standing at an antique automobile show on a perfect autumn Saturday in October 2015. The event is held in a park under old oak trees whose leaves are turning gold and red. The air is crisp and clear, carrying the smell of fallen leaves and distant wood smoke. Rows of restored cars gleam in the filtered sunlight, brass radiators polished to mirror brightness, paint buffed to impossible depths of shine, chrome and nickel and copper glowing warm. Among these treasures sit several Model Ts, each one representing hundreds of hours of patient restoration work. You approach one, a 1917 touring car, and the owner welcomes you, clearly proud of his work. He explains that he found this car in a barn in Montana, where it had sat since 1952. It was a wreck, rusted, seized, incomplete. He spent 3 years bringing it back, hunting parts at swap meets and through specialist suppliers, fabricating pieces that couldn't be found, stripping decades of rust and decay, rebuilding the engine bearing by bearing, valve by valve. Now the car looks as it might have looked rolling off the Highland Park assembly line 98 years ago. The black paint is deep and lustrous. The brass headlamps and side lamps reflect your face in distorted curves. The leather seats smell of oil and treatment compounds used to preserve them. The wooden steering wheel is smooth as silk, varnished to a soft glow. Even the toolkit under the seat is period correct. A jack, tyre irons, a hand pump, wrenches, all reproductions or original pieces found separately and assembled with obsessive attention to authenticity. The owner offers a demonstration. He walks you through the starting procedure, the same ritual performed 1 million times by 1 million Model T owners over nearly 2 decades of production. Set the spark retard, open the choke slightly, grip the crank properly, pull upward firmly. The engine resists, then suddenly catches, coughing once before settling into its rhythm. That sound, irregular, organic, mechanical, yet somehow alive. The owner lets it warm, then climbs in and drives slowly through the park, other spectators stepping aside to watch, smiling, some applauding softly. The Model T makes a slow circuit and returns. The owner shuts off the engine, and in the sudden silence, several people step forward with questions. How fast does it go? About 45 miles per hour on flat roads, the owner explains, though you wouldn't want to sustain that speed for long. How many miles per gallon? Between 15 and 20, depending on conditions. Is it hard to drive? Different, he says, not necessarily hard. The controls take getting used to, but people in 1915 learned quickly enough, and so can you. An elderly woman approaches, perhaps 90 years old, moving slowly with a cane. She stands looking at the Model T with an expression that's difficult to read. Nostalgia, certainly, but something deeper. The owner asks if she remembers these cars. She nods. Her father had one, she says quietly. She learned to drive in it when she was 16 in 1941. They kept it running all through the war when new cars weren't available. She remembers the smell of the exhaust, the way the engine vibrated, the technique for double clutching on hills, the winter mornings when her father would curse, trying to get it started in the cold. She reaches out and touches the car gently, her hand resting on the front fender. The metal is cool under her palm. She stands there for a long moment, perhaps seeing not this restored show car, but her father's battered working vehicle, perhaps hearing his voice explaining the controls, perhaps feeling 16 again, nervous and excited, learning to navigate the roads of her youth. Finally she withdraws her hand, thanks the owner quietly, and moves on. The owner watches her go, understanding that his car is more than machinery, more than a hobby. It's a portal to vanished time. The world the Model T created. You find yourself now on a modern interstate highway on a summer evening in 2020. 6 lanes of traffic flow in each direction, cars and trucks moving at 70 miles per hour, the road stretching straight and flat to the horizon. This highway didn't exist before the automobile, couldn't have existed without it. The Model T, more than any other single vehicle, created the demand and the possibility for roads like this. In 1908, most American roads were dirt paths, mud tracks, routes that had been worn into existence by wagon wheels following the paths of least resistance. There were perhaps 150 miles of paved rural roads in the entire country. By 1930, there were more than 100,000 miles of paved roads. By 1960, the interstate highway system was under construction. Today, America has more than 4 million miles of paved roads, a network that connects every town and city, every farm and suburb, a system so vast and comprehensive that you can drive from ocean to ocean without ever leaving pavement. The Model T made this necessary. When automobiles were rare toys for the wealthy, there was no political will to spend public money improving roads. But when millions of ordinary citizens owned cars, when farmers and shopkeepers and workers all drove Model Ts, they demanded better roads. They organised into automobile clubs, lobbied their representatives, voted for bond measures to fund highway construction. The car created political pressure that created infrastructure that created more demand for cars in an accelerating cycle. You find yourself on a quieter road now, a 2-lane highway in Kansas, and you pull off at a gas station. The station is modern, a concrete island with multiple pumps, a convenience store with bright lights and refrigerated cases, credit card readers at each pump. You can fuel your car in 3 minutes without speaking to anyone, swipe a card, drive away. This entire system exists because of the automobile and the Model T specifically. In 1908, there were no gas stations. Gasoline was sold at general stores and pharmacies in gallon cans. You'd carry the cans to your car and pour them into the tank using a funnel. By 1920, purpose-built gas stations began appearing. Simple affairs, often just a pump on the sidewalk in front of a store. By 1930, the modern gas station had emerged, dedicated buildings with multiple pumps, restrooms, mechanics on duty, recognisable brand identities, Shell, Texaco, Standard Oil. The Model T's fuel tank design under the front seat with no fuel gauge shaped early gas station culture. Drivers learned to estimate fuel consumption and stop frequently, better to stop too often than run dry on a lonely road. This frequent stopping pattern influenced gas station spacing. On major routes, stations appeared every 20 or 30 miles, close enough that a Model T could make it between them even running low. You continue driving, and as the sun sets, you see a motel ahead. its neon sign glowing in the twilight. Motels, motor hotels, were invented for automobile travellers, places where you could park directly outside your room, unload luggage easily, leave early the next morning. Before the automobile, travellers used hotels clustered around train stations. But Model T drivers needed places to stop along highways, between cities, wherever darkness or exhaustion caught them. The first motels appeared in the 1920s, simple cabins along popular routes, offering basic shelter for $1 or $2 per night. Over decades, they evolved into the motor lodges and chain motels that now line every highway, standardized and predictable. The Model T tourist camping beside the road or sleeping in the car eventually became the motel guest, expecting comfort and convenience. The evolution from one to the other traces the automobile's transformation from adventure to ordinary routine. Changed lives. You find yourself in a small town in Indiana on a quiet afternoon in 1922, transported back through imagination. The town has a population of maybe 3,000 people. Main Street is paved now with brick, and parked along it are 15 or 20 Model Ts. A decade ago, this same street would have been dirt, lined with hitching posts, the curbs stained with horse manure. The transformation has been total and swift. A doctor drives past in his Model T making house calls. Before the car, he travelled by horse and buggy, limiting his range to perhaps a 10-mile radius and forcing him to calculate whether distant calls were worth the time and exhaustion. Now he can cover 50 miles in an afternoon, visiting patients scattered across the county, carrying his medical bag in the back seat, reaching emergencies that once would have been unreachable. Rural medicine has been transformed. Infant mortality drops. Emergency response improves. The isolation that once made country living dangerous has been partially breached. A mail carrier parks his Model T in front of the post office, loading packages and letters. Rural free delivery, expanded dramatically after 1913, depends on motorized transport. Before automobiles, mail reached farms irregularly, requiring trips to town to collect it. Now carriers drive established routes daily, bringing mail directly to roadside boxes. Farmers receive newspapers the day they're printed. Catalogue orders arrive within days. The psychological distance between farm and world shrinks dramatically. At the edge of town, a young man in a Model T pulls up to a farmhouse. He's calling on a young woman, courting her. The automobile has transformed courtship. Before, young people met through church socials, town dances, family introductions, all supervised, controlled, limited by distance and parental oversight. But a Model T provides mobility and privacy. A young couple can drive to another town where no one knows them, attend a dance or a picture show, park on a quiet country road, and talk alone in darkness. Parents worry about this new freedom. Preachers warn against petting parties. But the change is irreversible. The automobile and sexual freedom are forever linked. You shift forward in time to a farm in Iowa in 1935. The Depression has hit hard, but the family survives, and their Model T, old and battered, has been essential to that survival. The father uses it to haul produce to town for sale, to reach odd jobs 20 miles away, to search for work in neighbouring counties. Without the car, the family would be trapped, isolated, unable to range widely in search of income. The Model T's mobility, even in a broken economy, provides options that mean survival versus starvation. The car also maintains connections. Once a month, the family drives 40 miles to visit relatives, a trip that would have been impossible with horses, requiring an overnight stay. Now they leave after breakfast, arrive by noon, spend the afternoon, drive home before dark. Extended families remain connected across greater distances. The social fabric stretches, but doesn't break. Memory and folklore. The Model T entered American folklore while it was still being produced. Jokes about the car circulated widely, published in newspapers, told at social gatherings, incorporated into vaudeville routines. Most played on the car's quirks and limitations, its light weight, its tendency to rattle and shake, the challenges of hand crank starting, the confusion of the planetary transmission. Why is a Model T like a bathtub? Because you hate to be seen in one. What's the difference between a Model T and a wheelbarrow? The wheelbarrow lasts longer. How do you make a Model T go uphill? Turn it around and back up. The jokes were affectionate mockery, the teasing that familiarity breeds. Everyone knew someone with a Model T. Everyone had stories about breakdowns and repairs and adventures. You find yourself watching a film in a theatre in 1927, a silent comedy featuring a Model T in a chase scene. The car bounces over railroad tracks, careens around corners, loses parts as it goes. A wheel rolls away, the hood flies off, the doors flap wildly. The audience laughs, recognizing the exaggerations of real experiences. The Model T has become a comic character, beloved and ridiculous simultaneously. Decades later, the car remains in cultural memory. In movies and television shows set in the early 20th century, Model Ts appear as shorthand for the era. Seeing one instantly signals old-fashioned, quaint, simpler times. The car has transcended its original function to become a symbol, representing an entire period, a way of life, a relationship between humans and machines that feels fundamentally different from what came after. What was lost? You stand now in a workshop in Minnesota in 1920, watching a farmer repair his Model T. He's replacing a broken spring, using hand tools, a wrench, a hammer, a pry bar. The work takes him an hour. He understands every component of this car. He could, if necessary, disassemble the entire vehicle and reassemble it. The Model T was designed for this accessibility. Its simplicity was democratic, placing mechanical mastery within reach of ordinary people. Compare this to a modern car, bristling with electronics, controlled by computers, diagnosed by specialized equipment. When something breaks, you drive to a dealer or a shop with proprietary tools and software. The relationship has changed from partnership to dependency. You don't repair modern cars, technicians repair them for you. Something intimate has been lost, a sense of understanding and control over your own tools. The Model T era represented a brief moment when machines were complex enough to be useful, but simple enough to be understood. You could see how the engine worked, trace fuel from tank to carburetor to cylinder, follow mechanical linkages from pedal to transmission to wheels. Cause and effect were visible, comprehensible. This transparency created confidence and self-sufficiency. The pace of life was different too. A Model T forced you to slow down. It couldn't go fast enough to make the world blur. You felt the road, heard the sounds, smelled the air. Travel remained an experience, not merely transit. You were present in the landscape you moved through, not isolated from it in a climate-controlled capsule travelling at speeds that erased detail. Communities were smaller, more self-contained. Yes, the Model T connected them, ended extreme isolation, but it didn't yet enable the sprawling suburban diffusion that came later with faster cars and highway systems. Towns remained coherent centres. People still knew their neighbours, walked to stores, gathered in shared spaces. The automobile was beginning to change this, but slowly, incrementally. The museum at night. You find yourself standing alone in a museum of automotive history on a late winter evening. The museum has just closed. The last visitors have departed. The lights have been dimmed, leaving only soft accent lighting to illuminate the displays. Outside, the city continues its modern rhythm, traffic flowing, headlights streaming past, the distant hum of highways. Inside, in this pocket of preserved time, silence settles like dust. In the centre of the main gallery sits a Model T, a 1915 touring car, restored to pristine condition. It sits on a raised platform, spotlit from above, the light catching the curves of the brass headlamps and throwing soft shadows beneath the chassis. The black paint seems to absorb light, the car appearing almost two-dimensional, a silhouette, an idea of a car rather than a physical object. You approach slowly, your footsteps echoing in the empty space. Up close, the details emerge. The brass fittings show faint traces of hand polishing, tiny circular scratches too fine to see from a distance. The wooden steering wheel's grain is visible under its varnish, growth rings from a tree cut down a century ago. The leather seats are pulled tight, creased in patterns that suggest use, even though this particular upholstery is recent. You can smell it, the faint odour of oil and leather and old rubber, real or imagined, the smell memory associates with old machines. The car sits motionless, engine cold and silent, but it doesn't feel dead. It feels dormant, waiting. You imagine the engine starting, that irregular rhythm filling the silent gallery, the car rolling off its platform, driving out through the museum doors into the modern night. But of course it doesn't move. It's a relic, a preserved specimen, cared for, but no longer living in any meaningful sense. Its function now is educational, inspirational, nostalgic. It teaches visitors about the past, about how people once lived and travelled, about the technological and social changes the automobile brought. Children press their faces close to the velvet ropes, asking parents questions about the strange controls. Elderly visitors pause, remembering. Younger visitors take photographs framing the car as a curiosity, a quaint artifact from a vanished world. A security guard walks through on his rounds, his flashlight beam sweeping across the exhibits. He pauses briefly at the Model T, as he does every night, then continues. His footsteps fade. You're alone again with the silent machine. You think about all the Model Ts that came before, the 15 million vehicles produced over 19 years. Most were scrapped, melted down, recycled into other objects, maybe steel beams in buildings, maybe parts for later cars, maybe weapons during wars. Some rotted in fields and barns, slowly returning to earth, iron oxidizing, wood decaying, rubber crumbling. A few thousand survive, preserved in museums and private collections, maintained by enthusiasts, driven occasionally in parades and at shows, treated with reverence and care. But the real legacy isn't the surviving cars, it's everything they changed. The roads that cover the continent, the suburbs that sprawl around every city, the gas stations at every crossroads, the motels along every highway, the drive-through restaurants and shopping centres and parking lots, the entire landscape shaped by automobile use, all of this traces back, directly or indirectly, to the Model T and its democratisation of automobile ownership. The Model T made cars ordinary, accessible, normal. It transformed the automobile from luxury to utility, from curiosity to necessity. It proved that complex machines could be mass-produced efficiently, teaching manufacturing lessons applied to every subsequent industry. It changed how people thought about distance, community, freedom, time itself. You stand in the darkened museum, looking at this silent black machine, and try to imagine the world without it. What would America look like if the Model T had never existed? Cities would be denser, more walkable, centred on streetcar lines and railroads. Rural areas would be more isolated, self-sufficient by necessity. The pace would be slower. Communities would be smaller and more stable, with less mobility, and perhaps less opportunity. It's impossible to say whether that world would be better or worse, only different. The Model T didn't inevitably lead to every consequence of automobile culture: suburban sprawl, traffic congestion, pollution, the isolation of individual family units in separate houses accessed only by car. But it started the process, opened the door, made possible the world we now inhabit. Outside, through the museum's windows, you can see traffic passing, modern cars, sleek and silent and fast, bearing no obvious resemblance to the angular black machine behind you. But the connection exists. Every car on that street is a descendant of the Model T, not in design but in concept, in the assumption that ordinary people should own personal vehicles, that mobility is a right, that distance can be conquered with gasoline and steel. The museum grows quieter still. The heating system cycles off. The building settles into its nighttime rhythm. The Model T sits unchanging in its pool of light, patient and permanent. You realize you're growing tired. The day has been long, the journey through history exhausting. The Model T seems to understand. It asks nothing of you, requires no attention, makes no noise. It simply exists, a marker, a monument, a reminder. The sound of the old engine becomes a memory, then a dream, then nothing. The rhythm of the assembly line fades, workers' faces blurring into shadow. The smell of gasoline and hot oil dissipates on the still museum air. The long history of the Model T, from first cranked start to final assembly line shutdown, from muddy Iowa roads to French battlefield mud, from farmer's essential tool to depression survival vehicle to museum exhibit. All of it settles into quietness. The road goes on. The modern cars outside the museum continue past, their drivers unaware of the history inside, focused on their destinations. They're living in the world the Model T created, driving its legacy without thinking about it, the way you breathe air without thinking about where it came from. Rest now. The story is complete. The Model T began as a simple idea, a car that ordinary people could afford and use. It succeeded beyond imagination, transforming a nation, changing millions of lives, teaching the world how to mass-produce complex machines. Then, having accomplished its purpose, it faded into history, replaced by newer, better, more sophisticated vehicles. But the essential thing it proved remains true. Mobility matters. Freedom of movement shapes everything: where we work, whom we love, how we understand distance and time and possibility. The Model T wasn't the first automobile, and it certainly wasn't the last, but it was the one that made automobiles matter to everyone. The museum is fully dark now, except for the single spotlight on the Model T. Your eyes are heavy. The car sits silent, waiting for nothing, complete in itself. Tomorrow visitors will arrive, children will point, guides will explain. But tonight, in this moment, there's only silence and shadow, and the patient presence of this black machine that changed the world. Sleep well. The road is there whenever you need it. The engine will start again when morning comes. For now, just rest. The Model T's work is done, and so is yours.